Hello, my name is Charles Alessi, Dr. Charles Alessi. I'm one of the authors of Increase Your Brain Ability and Reduce Your Risk of Dementia. And today's podcast is going to be around how to keep your brain tissue healthy. So, what is brain? Why should we keep brain tissue healthy? What is this concept of a healthy brain? And it's really interesting, isn't it? Over the years, we talked about the concepts around keeping your heart healthy, keeping your limbs moving. But until recently, we never thought that the brain was an organ which we could affect to keep it healthy. But actually, what we've realized over the last couple of years is that in many respects, we're really wrong, because there are many things we can do to ensure our brain remains healthy. And I think what I want to do today is describe these. So we know there are some external factors that affect our brain. We know that things like pollution and air quality can actually affect our cognition, in other words, our thinking. And we also know that products like pesticides can affect the way we think. But actually, what I really want to concentrate on is the internal things, the things we can do ourselves to actually manage our brain health better. And really, there's only 4 things we need to worry about. One is stress, one is sleep, one is medication and the use of medication, and the 4th is active physical fitness. So let me describe these. So stress is something we talk about a lot in the world we live in today. And there is this perception that all stress is bad, but that's not quite true, because actually if we look at our peak performance, it's when there is an element of stress in our lives. But occasional stress is beneficial and is wholly normal. But repeated, consistent and constant stress isn't particularly good for us, because it affects our immune system, which becomes less sensitive to the effects of some hormones which actually make us more stressed. And in many respects, what that leads to is an increase in inflammation in the body, and actually narrowing of the arteries, which we'll talk about in another podcast a little bit more, but is certainly not good for us. So stress in itself, occasional stress, isn't something we need to worry about. But if we are living in a world where we feel constantly stressed, there are things that we can do. We can start to really manage our work perhaps a little bit better, using lists of things we need to do, using better time management. We can use exercise more than we do, because exercise is a really good antidote against stress. And of course, we can get help. We can get help from our friends, from our family. But where perhaps we don't need to go to straight away is towards pills. There is this perception that pills solve everything, but we'll talk about that in this podcast. But pills aren't necessarily the answer to start with. There are other things we can do to manage our stress better. The second thing we've got to manage is sleep. We know that sleep really has big restorative powers, especially deep sleep. And again, we don't need to think of pills straight away if we're not managing our sleep as well as we wish we would. There is no real magic figure as to the amount of sleep an individual needs, because people are all very different. But clearly, having interrupted sleep all through the night, not feeling restored and fresh in the morning really means that we're not sleeping well as we could do. And again, there are things we can do. again, exercise is really quite important because it also makes us physically tired and makes it easier for us to sleep. And avoiding high calorie snacks and sugar, especially towards the end of the day, is probably a good idea because those in many respects are stimulants, as is coffee for that matter, and tea. And then having a really good environment, if we can, is useful. Managing noise, managing light, keeping our bedroom cool, and also, if we have an opportunity, having a nice bath before we go to bed. All these things really help. So again, we mustn't really think in terms of pills to start with, because pills have their own problems. And I think this is what the third thing I talked about, medication, is something we need to manage really well and really think about it before we start taking pills or supplements or anything else. We now know that dementia is not a condition which people get without getting other conditions. So what we say really is it doesn't travel alone. 41% of people with dementia tend to have high blood pressure, 32% tend to have depression, over a quarter have heart disease, a significant number have diabetes. There are a lot of people who also have a stroke. All these conditions are interrelated, and perhaps inflammation is at the heart of a lot of them. All these non-communicable diseases are related. And it's not unknown for people with dementia to also have to have medication, of course, not only for dementia, but also, of course, for the other conditions which they may be living with. And if we have to be thinking in terms of what we should be doing in terms of managing our medication, I think there are some magic lessons and magic things we need to think about. For example, only take medication which has been prescribed, and also after discussing this with your doctor, because just taking medication, you could be hitting one target but actually damaging another target. Medicines don't necessarily mix very well together. So really make sure that the medicines you're taking are actually compatible with each other. And also ensure that you get your medications reviewed by your pharmacists or by your doctor. So making sure you're taking the right medication for the right condition at the right dose, and not actually causing more problems than you try to solve. And we also need to remember that medicines are not the only things that work. For example, even some things like sleep. There are many excellent applications now and devices which can assist us with actually getting our sleep better. Actually, you can get them down on your phone. And people have also used things like aromatherapy to help. We don't need to think medicine straight away. And the last thing, which really keeps our brain healthy and a really important thing, is physical fitness and physical exercise. And it's never too late to start doing physical exercise, whether one is 80 or one is 40 or one is 12 or one is any age in between. And we know this is really important. And we know the evidence exists to show that people who are more physically fit tend to have a healthier life, and also tend not to develop conditions like, say, type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure. And given the association between conditions like type 2 diabetes and also blood pressure because of strokes, this is really quite important because it does make a significant difference to one's life. So how do I suddenly take on physical exercise if I've been a couch potato for the whole of my life? Well, there are things you can do, and they're relatively straightforward, and they don't need to be expensive. If we take a bus to go shopping or to go somewhere, well, it doesn't hurt if we stop at the bus stop before the one we need to, and we walk that small amount. We know that regular exercise is good for us. And if we can't do exercise every day, at least twice, 3 times a week, doing a little bit more is also good for us. Doing a little bit more physical exercise is also good for us. Longer walks. And if necessary, of course, there's a wonderful opportunity which pets give us. Dogs need walking. We know that people with dogs, for example, tend to be more physically fit. So again, this is another example of how we can keep fit. So in essence, what really the message for today is that there are many ways in which we can keep our brain healthy, and they're not complicated, and they don't necessarily entail us changing our lives dramatically. All we need to do is manage our stress, try to manage our sleep, ensure we know what we're taking in terms of medication, and actually make sure that they don't contribute to our dementia, or that they don't interact with other drugs. And finally, just keep fit physically. That's the message. It's now up to us to do it, and it's not too difficult. Thank you for listening.